Hello and welcome to Projector, and on this episode we swing into the SpiderVerse in this animated Spider-Man adventure.
Shortly after Miles Morales, played by Shameik is bitten by a radioactive spider, Wilson Fisk, aka Kingpin, played by Liev Schreiber, uses a super collider to open a portal into the multiverse. The collider sucks the alternate universe Peter B. Parker, voiced by Jake Johnson, out of his respective dimension, who begrudgingly helps Miles step into the role of Spider-Man. But it turns out that Peter isn't alone, as the portal also displaced the Spider People from other realities, including Hailee Steinfeld's Spider-Gwen, Nicolas Cage's Spider-Man Noir, Kamiko Glenn's Penny Parker and her robot SPDR, and John Mulaney's Spider-Ham, and now they must all team up to get back to their respective worlds and destroy the Collider.
2018 has definitely been the year of Spider-Man. The web-slinger has been everywhere, it seems. He was, of course, in the big MCU team-up movie Infinity War, played by Tom Holland, although he didn't really feel very good in that movie. Then he was in the video game that was unanimously praised and pretty much played by everyone. And then we have Tom Hardy as Venom. That gift to the world, which I have to admit, I kind of enjoyed in a so bad it's good way, although I think many other people enjoyed it considering it made an enormous amount of money despite the scathing reviews it got. Now we have Into the Spider-Verse, an animated adventure brought to us by Phil Lord and Chris Miller, the team behind the Lego Movie, and they've been working on this since 2014 and have very much brought the same approach to this, and I genuinely was looking forward to this movie, as I mentioned in my Venom review, because I feel that what Sony should have done, instead of rebooting the Spider-Man character in live action with the Garfield movies, what they should have done was made animated films for younger audiences instead, and try to add a little bit of distance from the Raimi films, try to do something very different, which this is wholeheartedly embraced in this outing, not least of which because it's a Miles Morales story. It's the first time he's finally got a film adaptation to the screen, and I think that the movie in general really embraces the possibilities of this new medium of telling a version of Spider-Man that's at once familiar but also very, very new, and I have to admit that Into the Spider-Verse is genuinely fantastic. Spider-Man has always been very popular with kids and teenagers, and a big reason for that is because they so readily identify with the struggles that the character has to face. A lot of what Spider-Man is about is growing up, especially his origin story, which is basically an extended metaphor for adolescence. That's something that even this new film references, because once Miles' powers start manifesting themselves, he thinks confusedly they might be signs of puberty, which becomes an early running joke. But in general, Spider-Man is about taking on burdensome responsibility with great power and so forth. It's about becoming an adult. It's about becoming a man, or in this case, Spider-Man. And I think that speaks to why the character has been so enduring over the years and had so many different permutations. It's because at its core, those themes of insecurity and uncertainty are universal. What this new version does, it takes those central Spider-Man conceits and tells it in a different, fresh way for a new audience. And it does this through the character of Miles Morales, who has previously not been adapted to the screen before. And when we meet Miles at the beginning of this movie, he's a kid with enormous potential. He could be anything he wants to be. He's incredibly smart, and he knows that he could do anything that he wants, except he isn't sure what he wants to be. And so he's trying to fit in at this new school. He's not sure if he actually fits in this environment, and he feels like he has a huge amount of pressure put on him just simply to succeed. And a lot of that comes from his father, Jefferson, voiced by Brian Tyree Henry, who's a cop. And he's very, very supportive of Miles. He loves Miles. He really genuinely does. And all he wants is the best for him, like any parent does. And I think that some of the best scenes in Into the Spider-Verse are actually the scenes between Miles and Jefferson, the way that they interact with each other, and I like the way that relationship plays out over the course of the film, where as he takes on his new identity, he starts to become quite secretive and withdrawn from Jefferson, and Jefferson misinterprets that as him acting out against the expectations that have been placed upon him. That kind of tension between them is the emotional core of the movie. There is just a general different dynamic with the character, especially in terms of his family. He's got this very supportive family behind him, and he's also got Uncle Aaron, voiced by Mahershala Ali, who's something of a safety net. He's someone that he can turn to. There's obviously been a divide between the two brothers. There's some kind of estrangement going on there, but he's someone that Miles can turn to for advice, and it feels like that he can be himself around in maybe a way that he can't when he's around his father, who's always taking on the role of the law, and again sets the character on a slightly different path than how we are familiar with him. But it also helps that Miles is just so relatable in general. You really, really like him and root for him to succeed. And he's very appealingly voiced by Shameik Moore, who's really, really funny. And I just think that this is a really great version of the character that sets itself apart from the numerous other versions of the character that we've seen in just 20 years' time. Of course, once Miles is bitten, he has to decide what kind of hero he wants to be, what makes him unique, and how he can draw strength from that. He's a Spider-Man that has all new abilities, like the fact that he can cloak himself, he can become invisible, he's got this electro-shock attack. Both these things he needs to learn how to control and how to harness, but honestly, his biggest stumbling block is simply himself. He needs to learn over the course of the movie to improve his own self-confidence, that he has self-worth, that he is ultimately powerful and deserves the responsibility that has been placed upon him. And this is a really important message, not just for children, but for people of all ages, that you are as strong as you're as capable of. You are the ones that can make the great change. You too can be the hero. But speaking of not living up to one's fullest potential, that brings us to the alternate universe version of Peter Parker, voiced by Jake Johnson, who is this older, more experienced version, but also one that's distinctly lost his way. He's estranged from Mary Jane, voiced by Zoe Kravitz. His life is in a rut, and he's developed a bit of a pizza paunch. And he eventually becomes a mentor for Miles, and I really like the dynamic that builds up between the two characters. On the one hand, you have this cynical, more jaded version of Peter becoming the teacher to the inexperienced student of Miles. There's a lot of comedy you can mine out of that situation, and the film definitely tries to do that, not least of which because you can plainly tell that Johnson and Moore recorded a lot of their dialogue together. There's a chemistry you can very much hear in the line deliveries as they bounce the dialogue off of each other, clearly kind of improvising as they go along, which brings a sense of looseness to that relationship that I appreciated. But while it's also amusing, there is some darker elements to this version of Peter. I think that he's very much someone that has completely lost his spark, and he doesn't know if there's actually much for him to return home for. And like the best student-teacher dynamics, the student also has things to teach the elder, and in this case, I think that Peter's arc very much mirrors that of Miles, in that if Miles is learning the true power of his own self-worth for the first time, then Peter is rediscovering it. He learns why he became Spider-Man in the first place and his passion for it. And then the rest of the Spider-Verse is brought into the fold, like Gwen Stacy, voiced by Hailee Steinfeld, in a nice inversion of how this character is usually presented as ultimately this tragic victim. Here, she's actually presented as by far the most competent out of all the Spider people. She's intelligent and resourceful, and she knows it, and she takes command of the situation. Once everyone comes together, she becomes the leader. And I liked Steinfeld's performance, but a lot of the reason why I like this character so much is because how beautifully she's animated. Gwen has a dance background, she's even wearing ballet shoes as part of her costume, and that informs everything that she does, especially in terms of her movement. In the action sequences, she moves with a grace and precision as she pirouettes across the screen, and she serves as something of a love interest for Miles, kinda, sorta. It's a bit complicated. Elsewhere, you've got Spider-Noir, voiced by Nicolas Cage, this 30s anti-hero version of the character. And while it isn't the largest of roles, Cage seems to be enjoying chewing on the hard-boiled dialogue. He only has maybe a couple of lines, but he is great at delivering them with that sort of 30s speak of yeah. You've also got the anime-influenced Penny Parker and her robot SPDR, and you've also got Spider-Ham, who I think steals a lot of his moments because he is very much this non-sequitur all the way through it, bringing in this kind of slapstick wackiness that I think both kids and adults will really appreciate. They all bring something different to the table. They're all various different incarnations to the character, and while they are all quite similar to each other, and they all can share in the same experience that Miles is going through for the first time, they all bring various strengths and weaknesses. But what the film is also trying to say is that these are all valid. They all are spider people. They're very, very different, but at the centre of them, they are a team and they work together. And I thought that was great fun just seeing them work off of each other. And I think that some people might have been a little bit concerned, certainly like I was, once they started making these characters prominent in the marketing, that they would kind of drown out Miles at the centre of the movie, but luckily they don't. They're introduced about halfway through the film, and they never usurp Miles as the focus of the film, in my opinion. The film always remembers that ultimately what it is supposed to be telling is a Miles Morales story, and that's exactly what it's doing. And as you've probably already gathered, the film has a terrific voice cast, but aside from the ones that I've already mentioned, you've got Lily Tomlin as a very different incarnation of Aunt May than we've seen in any other version of the character seen on film, but the one that also stood out to me was Liev Schreiber as Kingpin, the film's main antagonist, and I liked the design of the character in general. He's this huge, hulking man, and he's almost like this black hole onto himself. He is incredibly imposing, and considering that this is a film aimed at a fairly young audience, he is a fairly threatening, violent, and intimidating character. And I thought that he really worked well. Kingpin is ultimately trying to correct wrongs in his past, essentially. And that goes back to one of the main themes of the movie, that ultimately you are in control of your own destiny. The decisions that you make shape your future, for better or for worse. Where Into the Spider-Verse makes its most tremendous impression is in terms of its animation and visual style, which is absolutely gorgeous. I know that a lot of critics, when reviewing comic book movies, especially the more stylized ones, will say it's like a comic book come to life, that the panels have leapt off of the page. That is almost literally the case here. I love this movie's aesthetic and just how wholeheartedly it embraces it. You have characters' internal monologues popping up as boxes on the screen. You've got sound bubbles, speed lines. It really does feel like you're watching a visual comic book in the best way. And if you're a long-time fan of the source material, there is so much to appreciate here. Panels, front covers are lovingly duplicated. You can tell it's made by people with such passion and just such respect for the character and what it represents to all the different fans and people. And I think that's very much a Lord and Miller thing. It feels like the Lego movie in that way. And in fact, you could spend half of this movie just looking at background gags and references and in-jokes. There are actually hidden stealth cameos in the billboards of this alternate New York City. It really is a wonder to look at all times, and I like just how much it plays around just with the visual look of it. You've got characters that look wildly different from one another because they're from various different worlds. I mean, obviously, Miles looks very different to, say, Penny Parker, and you can see the influence in her design, or Spider-Ham, and yet it all comes together in the end. It really does work. And considering how much is crammed into this movie, even more than I can say, there's a lot of really great surprises that I'm deliberately withholding. It never feels overwhelming. It all feels just so, like it's made to precision. They already spent a lot of time reworking this movie again and again and again to make sure the balance was right. You can even see evidence of this because there's some material in the trailers that didn't make it into the final film. And so nothing feels shortchanged. It always feels like you get the right amount of time with the characters. They all get their little moments to shine. Do I wish there was a little bit more with the other Spider-Verse characters? Maybe a little bit, but not at the expense of the story and not at the expense of Miles. And the film does a really great job of just making sure that the whole thing works as a whole, balancing that comedy and drama of the story. It has a real beating heart all the way through it. The only downside, I think, to the film's visual aesthetic is in terms of the 3D presentation, which I would actually advise people to avoid. The film's visual look has a lot of doubled objects and deliberately blurred elements to draw your eye towards certain other things in the frame, and obviously those are the effects that 3D is supposed to traditionally do if you take your glasses off. So watching the movie in that format looks decidedly odd because of it. But nevertheless, the film still looks terrific even if you watch it in that version, but it's not the ideal one. I would suggest that you see this in 2D. I loved this movie. I thought that it was boundlessly inventive and an instant classic, right up there with the very best of the animated superhero films like Batman Mask of the Phantasm, nay, the best of the genre in general. In fact, I was wondering how I'd rank it among the Spider-Man movies that we've had, because I frankly feel that it leaves a lot of them in the dust. Even the MCU movie Homecoming, I think the only two that actually compare to it in any real way are the first two Sam Raimi movies, and even then I'm willing to admit that that might just be a little bit because of nostalgia. This may very well be the best Spider-Man movie we've ever had. And so I don't think I need to say any more than go see it, because you want to see it again and again and again.
Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse is a tremendous treat, doing for the character what Lord Miller did for Construction Blocks. It is a remarkably inventive tribute to the character that looks utterly breathtaking, absolutely filled with references and in-jokes that long-time comic book fans will adore, and manages to keep up a remarkable energy as the gags and plot turns fly by faster than the skyscrapers Spider-Man swings past. Given just how much the movie packs into its story, it's pitched just right, finding time for everything, whilst remembering that at its core, it's supposed to be a Miles Morales story. And Shameik Moore winningly voices the very likeable new Spider-Man as he comes to terms with his new identity, heading up a terrific voice cast through and through. Easily some of the most fun I've had at the movies all year. I didn't want this to end, and it may well be the best Spider-Man film to date.
If you like this review, then you can thwip over to my Patreon, where you can see my reviews early, among other perks, including access to my Discord server. But until next time, I'm Matthew Buck, fading out.